Good morning. Hearing is called order. Today we welcome back Secretary Napolitano. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here today. We look forward to hearing your testimony and also the President's budget for the Department of Homeland Security for FY13. Over the past year, we've seen some extraordinary security-related events. We've seen the demise of Osama bin Laden and Anwar al-Awlaki, growing concerns over Hezbollah's global reach and al-Qaeda's influence in northern Africa. Emboldened drug cartels continue to threaten our border, as well as the rule of law in Mexico. The persistent threat of homegrown violent extremism, and certainly, last but not least, the horrific natural disasters, including flooding and the violent tornadoes that struck Missouri and my home state of Alabama, a devastation that you and I were both able to witness firsthand. Despite the significance of these developments, perhaps the gravest threat to our nation over this past year has been our ballooning debt and crippling over-reliance upon deficit spending. This leads us to the question of how do we sustain and support vital security programs in a physical environment that is both profoundly and necessarily constrained. The short answer for this subcommittee is discipline, demanding that funds provide tangible results for our nation's security. The exercise of such discipline is not new. In fact, appropriators have always worked within the confines of finite resources and competing priorities. What's changed is the urgency and the scale of this discipline. There are no more shortcuts out of the budget's red ink, and Homeland Security cannot be immune from fiscal restraint. This assertion does not mean that we should embrace the flawed, overused expression, doing more with less. Rather, it means we must get the most out of each and every scarce dollar to further the Department's mission. This approach of linking funds to results is exactly what this subcommittee did in the recently enacted FY12 conference report. I would reject the mischaracterization of the FY12 spending decision as being predisposed to cut programs such as FEMA's grants or science and technology. That is a flawed claim that fails to acknowledge the blatant inadequacy of the administration's original FY12 budget request. Madam Secretary, this subcommittee makes no apologies for making it a priority to limit funding to vital operations and frontline personnel at the expense of scalable activities and programs that are failing to demonstrate tangible results or execute their budgets. And in spite of last year's significant budgetary challenges, we managed to increase funding above the request for potentially game-changing risk-based programs at CBP and TSA, programs you have strongly supported as crucial to the Department's success. Sadly, the fiscal year 2013 budget for DHS before us today fails to adequately sustain such operational priorities and repeats many of the same inadequacies as last year's request, using phony offsets and budget gimmicks while lowballing critical operational programs does not meet the nation's pressing needs for security and fiscal discipline. Madam Secretary, it is incumbent upon the administration to submit a responsible budget, one that does not rely upon a fiction of unauthorized fees, unrealistic assumptions, and flagrant contradictions, but rather a budget that adequately supports the Department's mission of funding needed detention capacity for ICE, supporting the necessary modernization Coast Guard and CBP assets, and keeping our research efforts on agricultural and biological threats on track. Whereas this administration chose to apply the term priorities as a convenient excuse to avoid enforcing our immigration laws and ignore legislative mandates, this subcommittee is obligated to work within real-world constraints with the law as it is currently written and to actually fund vital operations. This has to be and is the standard by which we will evaluate the FY13 budget request, a standard that demands accountability as well as the direct alignment of funding to result our Homeland Security, and the American taxpayer deserves no less. Madam Secretary, it is clear that we have a lot to go over this morning for this hearing. Before I recognize the ranking member for this subcommittee, let me first address an important issue pertaining to the Department's compliance with the law. There were 12 reports and plans required by statute to be submitted with the FY13 budget. As of today, 11 of those reports and plans have not been submitted. Only the FEMA DRF report that we received last night at 9:30 has been submitted, and we have a few questions about this report. Also, Madam Secretary, these reports and plans are required by law, and they're late. By the end of this hearing, this subcommittee would like an answer from you on the record when the department will comply with the law and submit these reports to the subcommittee. Now let me return to the distinguished ranking member who has served previously as chairman of this subcommittee, Mr. Price, for any remarks that he may like to make. Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Madam Secretary. We're glad to see you, and it's a pleasure to have you kick off our hearing season. The 2013 discretionary budget request for the Department of Homeland Security is $39.5 billion, plus an additional $5.5 billion in disaster relief funding that does not count toward the discretionary cap. At roughly the same level as 2012, this budget represents the first time an administration has not sought an increase for Homeland Security activities since the department was formed. Like all federal agencies, you've been asked to do more with less, and this has required some tough decisions. I was pleased to see this budget prioritize current and future threats by including significant increases for FEMA grants and for science and technology, albeit against a base which in both cases has been significantly and, in my opinion, excessively reduced in the last 2 years. The budget also produces reductions to Coast Guard personnel and acquisitions, a realignment of some current DHS programs, and a significant reorganization of Homeland Security grant programs, many things that we are going to need to explore to see how the department is prioritizing risks and allocating funds in this era of shrinking budgets. It's also a time to reflect about where the department has been and where you're heading. This includes the department's efforts to enforce our nation's immigration laws, which we all know to be in dire need of comprehensive reform, despite Congress's failure to act. The more I, as chairman and as ranking member, have looked at targeted efforts to improve immigration enforcement and otherwise work on this issue, the more I have become convinced that we simply must have comprehensive reform. This cannot be fixed from the appropriations side alone. You're well aware that illegal immigration attempts have decreased by 36% in the past 2 years and are 1/3 of what they were during their peak. This is impressive, and this decline is due in large part to the doubling of Border Patrol agents along the southwest border and the significant increase in immigration personnel working in the same region, along with improvements in detection technologies. These changes, this subcommittee had a lot to do with these changes, and we're proud of this progress. In addition, the administration has taken positive steps to improve its immigration enforcement policies. Now, some have been quick to criticize these efforts, but I believe it's both prudent and entirely appropriate for the administration to focus on the removal of criminal aliens, first and foremost, while providing prosecutorial discretion on less pressing cases. I also support your effort to better focus the Secure Communities program to make sure it's fulfilling its intended mission and is not being applied indiscriminately. And I'm pleased that the administration continues to carefully oversee the 287G program to revoke authorities and contracts at poorly performing detention facilities when it's clear that problems are not being resolved. I must also commend you on the job FEMA did over the past year, nimbly dealing with 99 major disasters. FEMA did a remarkable job of working with affected areas to make sure that our citizens and localities had the resources to remove damaged structures and debris as well as to begin the rebuilding process. This confirms that much of the lost capacity we witnessed following Hurricane Katrina has been rebuilt, also a priority over the past years of this subcommittee. This impressive performance was even more laudable since it occurred during a period of great funding uncertainty. Hopefully, the new disaster funding mechanism provided in the Budget Control Act will ensure long-term stability for the Disaster Relief Fund. That being said, there's some areas of your budget request that concern me. I see over 1,000 Coast Guard personnel leaving, significant reductions in mission support staff at both CBP and ICE, large reductions to Coast Guard and CBP aviation and maritime assets, which could impair both agencies' operational tempos. These reductions, and coupled with the assumed collection of $317 million in new aviation security fees that have not been authorized by Congress, this leaves us with several holes to fill at the outset. And that doesn't even get to commitments that you've already made, such as completing construction of a new DHS headquarters, which unfortunately is not funded in 2013 at all. I also have concerns about the growing pains that DHS components continue to experience, nearly a decade into the department's existence when it comes to effective oversight of personnel and procurement decisions. Last December, an internal review of the National Protection and Programs Directorate found mismanagement of and by NPPD personnel and misuse of funds. And similarly, an Inspector General report suggests that U.S. CIS officials are unduly pressuring adjudicators to approve applications and petitions, which could potentially lead to fraud. And we've seen too many Anti-Deficiency Act violations recently, where appropriated funds are diverted to different uses than permitted. So the department needs to hold its personnel accountable to ensure that issues raised by internal reviews and audits or the Inspector General are addressed promptly and effectively. I think we've made some progress, but we're not fully there yet, and as Secretary, I'm sure you'll keep working on it. Madam Secretary, I look forward to your testimony, working with you again this year.
This time I'd like to recognize the full Appropriations Chairman, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. This subcommittee has a special meaning for all of us, but especially myself, having been around when it first was brought into being. And we've worked with the department all of these 8 years, I guess it is. Anyway, your appearance today marks your first before this subcommittee since the 10th anniversary of 9/11. Since that unforgettable day, our country has taken necessary and impressive strides to protect our people from threats, man-made or natural. As the chairman noted, our brave soldiers and those in the intelligence community have surgically rid this earth of two of our greatest threats, Osama bin Laden and Anwar al-Awlaki. However, when we pause this week to honor the memory and legacy of ICE agents Jamie Zapata and Victor Avila, it will serve as an apt reminder that our country, our freedom, and our way of life remain under constant siege, and our job is not done, nor shall it ever be. In recent years, we've seen a different kind of threat to our sovereignty as it emerges in our escalating fiscal crisis. This committee has been front and center in attempting to address the very real security threat posed by out-of-control Washington spending and trillion-dollar deficits year in and year out. Last year, this committee worked to restore transparency, austerity, and tough oversight to the appropriations process. And we succeeded in reducing discretionary spending by some $98 billion compared to fiscal 10. That hasn't happened since World War II. While DHS was spared some of the more dramatic cuts, agencies across the board are being expected to make scarce dollars count, increase efficiencies, prioritize the mission, reduce redundancies, and budget responsibly. Your department may be the best at this, which is why I have some strong concerns about the budget you've put forth today. It demonstrates a reticence to prioritize frontline operations so vital to our drug interdiction efforts along the border, cutting CPB air and marine procurement by 52%, as well as reducing Coast Guard patrol boat hours by 40% and active duty military by 500 billets. It offsets hundreds of millions of dollars with an aviation security fee, which you know will never be enacted. It's a budget gimmick that Congress has rejected year in and year out ever since this subcommittee has existed. It also fails to include a meaningful and forward-looking acquisition program for the Coast Guard, reducing this important program by 20%. And it proposes to add layers to the already muddled bureaucracy at your headquarters. Needless to say, this gives me great concern. Madam Secretary, I hope your testimony today will allay my concerns as we work together in protecting our homeland. We're on the same team. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now I'd like to recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Dix.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We welcome you here today, and in reviewing your statement, I note that you make a significant statement on safeguarding and securing cyberspace. I serve as the ranking Democrat on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. This is an issue that has major implications for our government, both the military side and the civilian side, and the private sector. And I hope that, and I know you realize just how important this is. I mean, it's been estimated in the public press that over $1 trillion of intellectual property has been stolen by cyber criminals, some of which are nation states that we are aware of. And I just hope that in your statement today and in answering questions, you'll address these issues and what Homeland Security is doing about it. We know about the agreement you reached with Secretary Gates, to combine the efforts of the Defense Department and NSA with Homeland Security. But I think this is one of the paramount issues of our time. When Admiral Mullen was doing his farewell tour around, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, he feels that this is right up there with the most important defense issues there are, and that we are vulnerable, and we have got to do more about it. And there's been concern expressed before the Senate Intelligence Committee, before the House Intelligence Committee. I happen to serve on it, kind of an ex officio basis, that the country isn't doing enough about this issue, and that we have got to alert the American people to the possible. I mean, Secretary Panetta has said that this could be the Pearl Harbor of our time, or another 9/11, in terms of an attack on the infrastructure of the United States, and which could be crippling. So I hope you will address this today in your statement. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. This time, Secretary Napolitano, we look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Representative Price and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you today on the President's FY13 budget.
Madam Mike.
Am I on now? All right. Technology. As I was saying, this is the first of 3 hearings that I will be testifying at between today and tomorrow. The third, which is on a cybersecurity bill being introduced in the Senate, co-sponsored by Senators Lieberman, Collins, and Feinstein, among others, and a matter that we do consider of utmost urgency as this Congress moves forward. So, Representative Dix, I really appreciate your comments there. 10 years after the September 11th attacks, America is stronger and more secure today thanks to the strong support of the President and the Congress, the work of the men and the women of the Department of Homeland Security, and local, state, and federal partners across the Homeland Security enterprise. We have made significant progress. Threats from terrorism, including but not limited to Al-Qaeda and Al-Qaeda-related groups, persist and continually evolve, and the demands on DHS continue to grow. Today's threats are not limited to any one individual, group, or ideology, and are not defined or contained by international borders. Terrorist tactics can be as simple as a homemade bomb or as sophisticated as a biological threat or a coordinated cyber attack. We've had success in thwarting numerous terrorist plots, including the attempted bombings of the New York City subway and Times Square, foiled attacks against air cargo, and other attempts across the country. Nonetheless, continued threats from abroad and at home demonstrate how we must constantly remain vigilant and prepared. The President's FY 2013 budget for DHS allows us to continue to meet these evolving threats and challenges by preserving core frontline operational priorities through the redirection of over $850 million in base resources from administrative to mission areas. This continues our unprecedented commitment to fiscal discipline, which has led to over $3 billion in cost avoidances and reductions over the past 3 years through our efficiency review and other initiatives. Given the fiscal challenges to the Department's state and local partners, DHS is also approaching these partnerships in new and innovative ways. For 9 years, DHS has been supporting state and local efforts across the Homeland Security enterprise to build capabilities, awarding more than $35 billion in funding. As we look ahead, in order to address evolving threats and make the most of limited resources, the administration has proposed a new vision for Homeland Security grants through the National Preparedness Grant Program to create a robust national preparedness capacity based on cross-jurisdictional and readily deployable state and local assets. Using a competitive risk-based model, this grants program will use a comprehensive process to assess gaps, identify and prioritize deployable capabilities, put funding to work quickly, and require grantees to regularly report their progress. My written testimony includes a comprehensive list of the operational priorities in our budget. Today, I'd like to highlight just a few of them. First, preventing terrorism and enhancing security. This was the founding mission of DHS. It remains our top priority today. The FY 2013 budget safeguards the nation's transportation systems through a layered detection system, focused on risk-based screening, enhanced targeting, and information sharing to interdict threats and dangerous persons at the earliest point possible. The budget supports the administration's global supply chain security strategy across air, land, and sea modes of transportation by strengthening efforts to pre-screen and evaluate high-risk containers before they are shipped to the United States. We also continue our strong support for state and local partners through training, fusion centers, and intelligence analysis and information sharing on a wide range of critical Homeland Security issues. To secure and manage our borders, the budget continues the administration's unprecedented focus on border security, travel, and trade by supporting our Border Patrol agents and CBP officers on the front lines, as well as the deployment of proven effective surveillance technology along the highest trafficked areas of the southwest border. It also continues security improvements along the northern border. And to secure the nation's maritime borders, the budget invests in recapitalization of Coast Guard assets, including the 6th National Security Cutter, fast response cutters, as well as the renovation and restoration of shore facilities. The budget request also continues the Department's focus on smart, prioritized, and effective enforcement of U.S. immigration laws. In FY 2013, we will complete nationwide implementation of secure communities. Through this initiative and our continued collaboration with the Department of Justice, we expect to continue to increase the number of criminal aliens and other priority individuals who are identified and removed from our country. This budget provides the resources necessary to address this changing population while continuing to support alternatives to detention reform, and immigrant integration efforts. The budget also focuses on monitoring and compliance, promoting adherence to worksite-related laws through criminal prosecution of egregious employers, and expansion of the E-Verify system. To safeguard and secure cyberspace, the budget makes significant investments to strengthen cybersecurity, including funds to expedite the deployment of Einstein 3 to prevent and detect intrusion on government computer systems, increase federal network security across the federal government, and continue to develop a robust cybersecurity workforce to protect and respond to national cybersecurity threats. In 2011, as noted, the Department responded to a record number of disasters. To ensure continued resilience to disasters, the President's budget focuses on a whole-of-community approach to emergency management. It includes resources for the Disaster Relief Fund, the DRF, which provides a significant portion of the federal response to victims in presidentially declared disasters or emergencies, and is funded largely through authority provided under the Budget Control Act. The budget also continues to provide essential support to national and economic security by, among other things, supporting the Coast Guard's operations in the polar regions and by continuing to support ICE and CBP's efforts to protect U.S. intellectual property rights and collection of customs revenue. The FY 2013 budget proposal reflects this administration's strong commitment to protecting the homeland and the American people through the effective and efficient use of DHS resources. As outlined in my testimony today, we will continue to preserve frontline priorities across the department by cutting costs, sharing resources across components, and streamlining operations wherever possible. Mr. Chairman Adderholt, Representative Price, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'll be pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony, and again, we appreciate your presence here this morning. Want to get right into the questions, and let me just mention to the members of the subcommittee, since we do have a pretty full house today, we will go by the 5-minute rule. We'll appreciate you sticking by that as close as possible. Madam Secretary, I would like to address an issue that we have talked about some, that you are aware of. You mentioned in your opening comments. I received your letter you sent to me yesterday in response to the January 17th letter, which I sent you about the administration's delay in deploying the secure communities in Alabama. Unfortunately, your letter did not actually address the simple, straightforward question in the letter. Today, on behalf of the people of Alabama, I really need an answer. And the question is, will you allow ICE to fully deploy the program in Alabama?
Mr. Chairman, secure communities, as I've noted, is an important tool in our immigration enforcement prioritization efforts. It has been turned on in a number of Alabama jurisdictions, covering, we estimate, 75% of the foreign-born population of Alabama. It has been deployed in over half of Alabama's counties. As you note, there are a few remaining counties left. We anticipate that nationwide deployment of secure communities across all remaining jurisdictions will be finished in FY13.
I understand that there are you say 75% of the foreign-born population. There's still close to half of the counties in Alabama that have not been. I would, I think if you look at it, there's a lot of people who would look at it and say that the delay has been taken for political reasons. It would be that our request that you reverse that decision, that you move swiftly in Alabama and across the nation. I know that it has been cited before, the fact that there is an ongoing lawsuit, but I would submit to you that Arizona and South Carolina are fully deployed, despite the lawsuit against those states for enacting an immigration enforcement law. And I think the safety of Alabamans is certainly not a lesser concern than those states.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the differences between the remaining Alabama counties and Arizona and South Carolina is that those states were basically turned on before litigation commenced. And as you know, the Alabama law has been upheld in part and enjoined in part. It's a somewhat confusing situation. It's due to be argued in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in the near future. And I believe it prudent to await the 11th Circuit's guidance on this issue.
Well, so are you saying there's a legal reason?
Among other things.
Well, my understanding of secured communities, and we've discussed this quite a bit, it's about getting arrest information to ICE for federal law enforcement action. And the lawsuit is about arguing that the federal government has preeminence in immigration enforcement. So it seems to me like deploying secure communities is more consistent with the government's position in the lawsuit. So, if there is a legal reasoning for delay in deployment, I can't really see where that argument would come in.
Well, I'm not sure, and again, these questions are probably more appropriately addressed to the Attorney General, but I believe that Alabama in its papers probably doesn't concur with the preemption argument there.
Well, one can only conclude, as I say, that the delay in Alabama has been taken for political reasons. And so this morning I would request that you reverse the decision and move out swiftly in Alabama and really and actually across the nation. Secure communities, in your words, is the single best tool for identifying criminal aliens for removal. That only makes our communities safer, and the people of Alabama, in my opinion, deserve your commitment on this vital issue. The budget, let me switch to another issue. The budget includes includes $335 million for the Safer Grant Program for firefighters. This request, combined with the $1 billion you discussed in your testimony that is referenced in the official budget appendix to hire post 9/11 veterans, is an unprecedented amount for this program. Everyone that you see on the dais from the Democrats to the Republicans supports our local community firefighters and supports the hiring of veterans, which the President has stated will be a program's objective. But this subcommittee has concerns about the amount of funds requested in these programs when other programs integral to our nation's security has been cut back substantially. Is it correct that you have not awarded any fiscal 2012 or 2011 funds thus far?
In the Safer Grants, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, in the Safer Grants.
I'll get back to you on that. If they have not been awarded, part of the delay in getting grants and grant guidance out, of course, is that we didn't get the FY12 actual budget until fairly recently. We will be releasing later on this week the grant awards for FY12 for the UASI and state Homeland Security grants, and I will get the data of the projected awards for Safer.
Okay. Like I said, it's according to our information, the program just announced the guidelines on January the 25th for the FY11 funds. But if by our math that we've looked at, it means that you have almost $744 million of grants from FY11 and FY12 for Safer programs that have not been awarded, and that would be on top of the over $500 million that has been awarded but not drawn down. Does that sound correct?
That could be. I will look into it, Mr. Chairman, and report back to you.
Okay. If it is the case that those funds are out there, and as that, like I said, according to the math of the subcommittee on how we've looked at it, if this is such a priority for the administration, then our question is, why wasn't it included in the FY11 guidelines that was just released a little over 2 weeks ago? Also, I'm puzzled by how you can say that you want to hire veterans, which would be new hires, yet you ask for a waiver of the requirement that the funds be used for new hires.
Well, we've asked in a number of grant programs for some flexibility on how personnel costs are accounted for. But the department for the last years has really focused on veterans hiring. There's a great pool of people. They have already demonstrated a public service mission. A lot of their military training has some crossover application to some of the jobs we have in the department. So we have now, excluding Coast Guard active duty, 50,000 some odd veterans that are on staff at the department, including in leadership positions. And we intend to continue that record.
Well, as I say, I look forward to getting back with you, but it seems like, according to our math of what we've looked at and the information that we've been given, that there could be some good news here that you may not really be aware of. You could direct the $744 million in unobligated firefighter grant dollars towards the new hires with a focus upon veterans, and then wouldn't cost the taxpayer a single new cent.
We'll look into that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, I'd like to recognize Mr. Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me continue to ask the Secretary about first responder grants, looking now more broadly at what you're proposing under FEMA for the 2013 budget. You're requesting $2.9 billion for first responder grants. That's an increase of $525 million above 2012.
Above 2012 enacted, yes, sir.
That's right. Similar to what Congress enacted for 2012, you're proposing some restructuring of state and local grant programs into broad categories, and that's what I'd like to clarify here. We have $1.54 billion for a national preparedness grant program, which the Secretary will allocate to the highest risk projects, limiting the availability of funds to 24 months, as I understand, to deal with this drawdown problem. This grant program will incorporate the expiring authorized grant programs currently funded under the State Homeland Security Grant Program, which includes UASI, Transit, and Port, and a few other grant programs. You're proposing $670 million for firefighter grants, equally divided between SAFER and equipment, with waivers to deal with the layoffs and the need for rehires. And I just say parenthetically that the full statement does clarify the relationship of the veterans hiring and the $1 billion in the Jobs Act to this basic request. We probably need that elaborated, but I do think your full statement makes that clear. You're also proposing $350 million for emergency management performance grants, $60 million for a new training partnership grant. That's the old National Domestic Preparedness Consortium renamed. And then $279 million for management and administration of grant programs, exercises, technical assistance, evaluation, and the Center for Domestic Preparedness. Now, as you know, Madam Secretary, this committee's expressed concern over consolidating FEMA grants in the past. These grant programs operate under different authorities. They have a variety of purposes, as reflected, maybe most graphically, in the differing allocation formulas that have applied to a number of these programs. Last year, Congress disregarded these concerns, consolidated all FEMA grant programs into one budget line, due, one assumes, to the drastic overall cuts to grants and the difficulty of deciding how to allocate what was left. But what you're proposing for 2013 continues grant consolidation and in some respects actually takes it beyond what we did in 2012. So could you first walk me through your new FEMA grant proposal in more detail? For example, if the National Preparedness Grant Program will be focused on risk and quickly procuring deployable assets, does that mean you'll be eliminating funding for previously authorized grants that focused on longer-term security enhancements and hardening projects such as port and security grants, which might well take more than 24 months to draw down? And then secondly, I wonder if you could give us some examples of areas you think should continue to be funding with the 2013 request, and then maybe distinguish that from areas that you think might now be deemed nice to fund when the budgets are more robust, but for the moment deferrable.
Well, Representative Price, what we are proposing is that 16 grant programs be consolidated under the National Preparedness Grant name. The name comes from the National Preparedness Goal. A lot of the stakeholders, the grantees, helped draft that goal and the material that goes with it. We provide in there, would provide in there, and this is something we want to work with the Congress on, appropriate exceptions or waivers for longer-term projects. But we have also seen that it's important to continually incentivize our grantees to get money out of the door once it's been allocated. So one of the arguments made in favor of drastically cutting our grant award in FY12 was the $8 billion or so that was deemed unspent across the country. We've really scrubbed those numbers to see what really is, already out there. It's been allocated, but it just hasn't been spent yet. And we've provided and intend to provide a schedule to the grantees on how to get the old money out. But as we have matured as a department, so have the grants and the grantees. So we already start from a $35 billion base across the country. And we believe that now it would be prudent and effective and efficient to be able to look regionally and nationally about where we have gaps in the security framework that we must have, how we fill those in best, that it ought to be primarily risk-based in its assessment, and that it have at least at the outset a 24-month deadline to help facilitate grantees actually moving the money from the awardees to the actual street and to the front line.
Well, just by way of elaborating the differences that are involved here, the most graphic difference probably is the allocation principles that have governed the state grants and the USC grants, which are much more risk-based, much more targeted on the areas of greatest risk. Can you help us understand proportionally where this money is going to go in this combined with this combined approach, and how those different allocation approaches get blended?
Well, again, this is a proposal for the Congress with some explanatory language in the budget documents we've presented. But in my vision would be that there'd be a somewhat smaller amount than in the past that is dedicated and spread across the country, primarily based on population, and using that formula, but that the overwhelming bulk of the National Preparedness Grant be based on risk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Rogers.
I want to ask you about our illegal immigration deportation policy. I know that you are deporting criminal aliens, and I congratulate you on that. That's what we all want. My question, though, deals with those non-criminal illegal aliens, people who have not committed a crime in this country, or at least convicted of it. Are we deporting any of those people?
Yes.
How many?
Well, in FY11, the last year we have numbers for, we removed from the country roughly 400,000 individuals. Of those, 55% had criminal convictions. That's a much higher number than a couple years ago when it was in the low 30s. But the remainder fit within other priorities. They were fugitives from existing warrants. They were recent border crossers. They were repeat violators. They meet other of our priority guidelines in ICE.
But were there any deported that were just simply here illegally?
There were a small number that would have been picked up, and yes.
Yes.
Well, in FY11, 90% of all of those deported were in one of our categories. They were criminal aliens, recent border crossers, repeat violators, fugitives from warrants, and that remainder, 10%, had a variety of reasons why they were deported. Some of them were deported because they were picked up in conjunction with others who were being arrested. There's a variety of reasons, as
What do
you
you
know.
mean recent border crossers?
Excuse me, please?
What do you mean recent border crossers?
Those that we picked up near the border, we are actually we are not just turning them around and busing them back across the border. We're actually putting them into the system. They get a record. They are actually removed from the country. That's helpful in a number of ways, one of which is it gives us greater flexibility on how to deal with them if we find them as a repeat violator.
There are an estimated 13, 14 million or whatever illegal aliens in the country, the great bulk of whom have not committed a crime. What is the policy of the administration on dealing with those illegal aliens who have not committed a crime and are not recent border crossers?
Or in another category of priorities. Yeah. Well, as you said in your opening statement, you know, one of the things we must do in DHS is prioritize the mission. And those that have committed no other crime, and when we look at other factors, length of time in the United States, family relation, their ties in the United States, service in the military, and the like, those would be low priority matters.
Well, some people say you've given those people amnesty. that they no longer need worry about being here illegally. What do you say to that?
Well, I think the amnesty term is quite frankly, way too overused with respect to immigration. This is an area that profoundly needs to be reexamined by the Congress for a whole host of reasons. But the fact of the matter is the numbers were, as I laid out to you, in FY11, 90% of those removed did fall within mission priorities, as we have stated them. 10% did not, but they were still removed from the country.
Switching subjects. The aviation security passenger fees were established in the Aviation Transportation Security Act of 2001. Your budget proposal for this coming year would change the collection of that aviation passenger fee, would realize $317 million by charging each passenger, what, $5 per trip?
Yes.
That would raise $317 million. The department has proposed that for every year it's been a department. And every year the Congress says, don't do that again. It's not going to happen. And I'm here to tell you again, it's not going to happen. And yet you have included that $117 million of that in your budget to be spent by the department for all sorts of purposes. And if that fee doesn't come into being, you're short $117 million. Assuming that to be the case, where do you propose to cut $117 million?
Well, I'd like to go back to the fee because that fee hasn't been addressed or raised since 2002, and as we all can appreciate, the costs of aviation security have risen dramatically. The fact that the airlines now charge to check a bag has put more into the carry-on baggage that we have to screen for. That's increased costs for the department. And it seems to us, both as a matter of fairness, but also a matter of deficit reduction, that it's appropriate to raise the fee. Now, last year, one of the arguments against the fee was that we had said we were going to deploy it on a enplanement basis, meaning each leg you would pay a fee. Congress objected to that, and so we have reformed the proposal to say, all right, we'll just charge it once for the whole trip. But both for matters of making sure that we support the aviation security system and for deficit reduction, I think Congress ought to readdress that issue.
Well, I understand what your position is, but what do you, if we don't do it, where are you going to cut $117 million?
Well, Representative Rogers, I don't play what-ifs. We're at the beginning of
we
the
do.
process.
We have to play what-ifs.
Well,
we have to find the money to fund your department. Now, if there's a $117 million shortfall because we don't enact this tax, which I don't think we will, where do you propose to cut that amount of money? We need to know.
Well, Representative Rogers, it's not a tax. It's a fee. It's a fee that hasn't been increased for almost 10 years.
Please answer the question.
And we will work with the Congress on all matters related to the budget. But how and why we would have to replace that hole, to me, it doesn't make sense. This is an aviation security fee. The costs of that have risen dramatically. It's a small fee, a small price to pay.
Well, when TSA Director Kip Hawley in 2006 came here again with that proposal, as every secretary has since I've been here, since the committee's been here, when he came in 2006 with that same proposal, I told Kip Hawley at that time, quote, the next time you come up here and propose a tax you know you can't pass, dumping the problem in the lap of Congress, I want you to pay the price. End of quote. I repeat.
Well, Representative, I think the fact that the prior administration also requests an increase in the fee shows that it has bipartisan support.
And I would tell you that the change of Congress that's taken place over these 8 or 9 years year in and year out rejects it, and it's not going to happen this year. So be prepared, and you'll have to pay the price. I yield.
Mr. Diggs.
Going back to cybersecurity, why don't you tell us what you're doing with other government agencies and with the private sector? And there's a lot of concern that the private sector isn't being candid about their problem here, and that we've got to do something to have regulations to make people report cyber attacks. Where is the administration on all this?
Well, the administration supports the bill that was introduced in the Senate this week that does have information sharing as part of it. Indeed, the information sharing provisions, I think, were migrated from Senator Feinstein's bill in the Intel community. It has within it a process by which the Department of Homeland Security will work with the private sector that comprises critical infrastructure of the country to share information and report incidents of cyber intrusion, cyber attack, and the like. This is an area that's been a growth area within DHS. We work across the interagency. We work with critical infrastructure already, but as you note, that can be more episodic than systemic. And given the size of the problem, we really need much more involvement by the private sector.
And the private sector has not been totally willing to be involved. Isn't that correct?
As I said, it's episodic. It's not overall.
What
We're
about
just
the
talking
other,
core critical infrastructure.
What about the other civilian agencies in the federal government? How are we doing with them?
We have now deployed Einstein 2 to 17 of the 19 agencies to which it's to be deployed. The 18th is...
give the committee just a quick definition of Einstein 2.
It is a system. I don't want to go too much into matters that are classified, but it is a system that detects any sort of network intrusion.
But it isn't totally perfect, right? I mean, in other words, even where Einstein's been deployed, as I understand it, there's still ways to work around it.
Representative, this is an area of constant creativity by our adversaries, but we're already working on Einstein 3. One of the things the budget request does, it would allow us to accelerate the development and deployment of Einstein 3.
Now, how is your relationship with NSA and the Defense Department on these issues?
Very good. As noted earlier, Secretary Gates and I reached an agreement between our two departments, which really have the overwhelming bulk of the work. DOJ does a lot of the criminal investigations. Commerce has some work. Energy has work. We recognize that. But the bulk of the protection and preventive work that needs to occur is between DOD and DHS. And we reached an agreement on how to do that, how to cross-deploy some individuals, and how we both can utilize the resources of the NSA, albeit in the civilian context, you have to build in a much more robust privacy and other protections when you are talking about using NSA methodology.
Okay. Let me switch to another subject, polar icebreakers.
Yes.
There was a study done in 2010 concluded that 3 heavy and 3 medium icebreakers are the minimum needed for the Coast Guard to fulfill its statutory missions. Currently, we have only 1 medium icebreaker, the Healy, in service, with 1 heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, expected to come back into service during the next fiscal year. Can you tell us what your plans are? I know you've got one in the budget for this year, right?
We have $8 million in the budget to begin the design and plan of another icebreaker. I'm glad you raised this because these are going to be essential resources that we will need. There's going to be increased oil drilling in the north, up in the Arctic. In fact, the Healy just was the ship that helped bring the oil to Nome, Alaska, which was running out of heating oil for the winter. And you are right. We only have the Healy and we have the Polar Star that's in dry dock. So our hope is that the budget request will be approved, and we can move to the design and plan of a third icebreaker.
Why not repair the Polar Sea as well?
Well, we would intend to do that, but the problem is when you do repairs or maintenance they're in dry dock and they're not operational. We certainly need at least one more operational icebreaker.
Okay, well, I'd like to work with you on this, and I appreciate your testimony today, and keep working on this cybersecurity issue. It's a big, big problem for the country.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dix. Mr. Friedlandheisen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, first of all, I want to thank you for coming up to New Jersey with Director Fugate and some of the FEMA people when we had our hurricane disaster along the Passaic River. It was good to have you up there. Appreciate all the good work, and FEMA gets high marks from a lot of the people that I represent. I'd also like to associate myself with some of the remarks that Mr. Dix made initially in terms of cyber, who's doing what, I think is pretty important. So my questions sort of focus on a lot of what happens in this country depends on investments in research and development. What are your department's priorities in that area? I've been looking over your budget. There's some reductions in R&D. You have, I think, something called a Science and Technology Directorate. Sounds sort of ominous, but what are your priorities in terms of research and development?
I think because it sounds ominous, we just call it S&T.
Yeah.
And what we do with and propose for S&T is that we restore the research and development funds it has to the FY11 levels. Those funds were cut dramatically in the FY12 budget. That was a cut that we opposed, continue to oppose, because particularly in the Homeland Security area, research and development long term needs to be done. The research cycle is not an annual cycle or even a biannual cycle. It takes a while, but we are focused on biodefense. We are focusing it on explosive detection devices. We are focused on research in the cyber area. Those are three of the areas of focus within the S&T Directorate.
So how can you assure us, since both some of us serve on other committees, Mr. Dixon and I serve on Defense and Intel, that what you're doing has any relation to what, should we say, others are doing across the spectrum here? What level of assurance can you give us that we're not, even though you're some reductions in your R&D budget, fairly substantial, you've raised several priorities, including explosives and biologics. How do you, who's out there as sort of the gatekeeper in terms of assuring that we're making the investments we need to do and they aren't in any way duplicative?
With respect to the other major funded department that receives monies for these things, we are constantly working with them, looking to see whether there are technologies or things that have been deployed, for example, in the military context that can be altered or adjusted to use for our work so that we don't unnecessarily reinvent the wheel, so to speak. So there's a constant interaction at the agency staff level on that regard.
So you're assuring us that you work with all these other, with the DOD, FBI,
yes,
and other agencies to make sure that we are not duplicating.
Yes.
Okay. What's the a lot of the colleges and universities are involved in this research and development. What is their role?
Well, we have in the
so-called centers of excellence.
That's right.
And how do they relate to this particular issue?
Well, we reach out into the academic community. I think this year we have 32 million or so there. It's a competitive process for a university or so to be named, but we are looking there for basic research. For example, in Representative Price's district, there is a large center,
good
University
choice.
of Bio. But he left.
Yeah, he did. He was assured of.
Would you let him know that I referenced it? Thank you. There is a bio center there. So what we do is identify where we need to begin the research cycle, where there are things that we would like that academics can do, and then the money is awarded appropriately.
And lastly, you have about 230,000 employees under your Department of Homeland Security umbrella, they have a lot of systems, information systems, and I'd like to know, I'm sure other members would like to know, how those systems interact, and more importantly, how well they're protected from the sort of attacks we're talking about here. And do those systems talk to one another? One of the things I think we've found out here, there are a lot of systems are sold, and there are a lot of vendors protecting, obviously, their systems. What are you doing to assure us that the systems that are legacy systems or new systems that may be bought, that there's actually what we'd call, used to call interoperability and such?
Let me take it in two bites, Representative. There is money in the budget to continue consolidation of data systems within the department. As you know, we're comprised of what were formerly 22 different agencies, and we have lots of legacy systems and the like. So that process continues to be funded under the President's request. That's one set of systems. The other one I think you're referring to is all the data we collect, TSA, CBP, ICE, criminal data from the FBI. I would invite you to visit the National Targeting Center if you wish, but we have now been able to consolidate, not necessarily consolidate, but to make interoperable all of those data systems, so on a real-time basis we can target and monitor cargo and passengers traveling to and from the United States.
And lastly, we used to call it need to know. What exists today to assure, certainly, that people's privacy is protected under the Constitution, but that we also achieve what we want to achieve, which is to have instant communication, which would keep us safer?
Well, you're right about the privacy issues, and they are important. We operate under a need to share information, and one of the more important things we do is take intel that has been generated in Washington, D.C. and translate it into products that can be shared to private sector that may be implicated and to state and local law enforcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Louie.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Madam Secretary. I wanted to follow up on the cybersecurity issue for just a moment first. New York's and the nation's economy depend on the health of our financial system and the free flow of credit and capital. A successful cyber attack, as you know, on America's financial systems could have devastating effects on our nation's economy. How is DHS working with the private sector and specifically the financial system to ensure they have the tools necessary to combat cyber threats?
Well, right now, it is a critical sector of the economy. Right now, if we learn of a breach or are informed of a breach or intrusion, we immediately offer aid and response to repair, to patch, to mitigate, and we also look for whether there could be other systems around the country that could be affected by the same, say, virus. And that is underway. But as I mentioned to Representative Dix, there's no requirement for information exchange in that regard. So we don't know that we actually get all the information we need from that critical piece of the economy.
Well, if necessary, we could have a classified briefing, but I think it's absolutely essential that we try and put plans in place when we know there have been threats on the New York Stock Exchange and other major corporations that affect our economy. So I think once it's been hacked, it's kind of late. I'd be interested to know what, in fact, we're doing to prevent it.
Well, again, we've worked with NASDAQs and others in the financial sector in terms of overall protection and prevention. But a lot of this is tipped off or keyed off of intrusions or attacks that occur, and what we want to do is quickly stop, mitigate the damage, minimize the damage, and see if we can make sure other entities are not infiltrated as well using the same methodology.
On to another issue on block grants. When you distribute the FY12 funds, will you continue the structure of awarding funds in a manner that provides funding directly to high-risk urban areas as well as setting aside other funding for states? I believe it's important to provide funds for both high-risk urban areas as well as states to help coordinate state and regional capabilities, and that's why I've been supportive of both UASI and SHISHGAP.
The FY12 grant awards will come out at the end of the week, and they will continue that method of how we get the money out.
And as you know, UASI was created for high-risk urban areas, but has since been distributed to areas that are not high-risk. Would you support more targeted investments to ensure that the highest-risk cities receive the funding they need?
We have really carefully looked at the UASI list, particularly in light of the dramatic cuts to UASI funding in the FY12 budget, and looked at how best to make use of those monies in a targeted way. We have also looked at the FBI's analysis of risk and security of our communities to help inform our decisions.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for recognizing the importance of the Security of the Cities program, which is a joint effort between federal and local governments to prevent radiological or nuclear material from being detonated in New York. And I've seen it work with the police department and Ray Kelly and what procedures they put in place. This is so very important. The President's budget request provides $22 million for securing the cities, which is level funding from the prior year. Last year, securing the cities in Manhattan received $20 million of the $22 million provided, with an additional $2 million set aside to establish a new pilot program in a second city. Will the Department of Homeland Security continue the commitment to New York as the primary and most at-risk recipient?
That's our intent, yes.
And as the program looks to expand to a second pilot region, will the New York program continue to receive $20 million under the request?
I don't know what their request is in FY12, but our intent is to continue full funding for the New York pilot.
We'll continue that discussion. I thank you. As you know, we've been talking about collective bargaining, and I've been very pleased that attention has been given to that issue. Could you tell me how DHS plans to go forward to provide collective bargaining rights to the transportation security offices? You know, the rest of DH has it, and I know they're working on it. Perhaps you could elaborate.
The TSA workers had their election last year. They selected their union representative. We are, and by we I mean leadership of TSA, has been in discussions with their leadership over the last months, and I think formal bargaining begins in another week or two.
I think, just to bring it to your attention, I'm sure you're aware, they do not yet have full collective bargaining rights. And there shouldn't be two sets of rules for employees of the same agency, one for TSOs and another for all TSA employees. So I would hope you would give this additional attention. Do you have an update on the ongoing discussion between TSA and its employees?
Yes, I've been kept up to date. I would note, however, that they were organized pursuant to a different statute than the other employees of DHS, and so that does make some differences in terms of what can be within the scope of the bargaining process.
But I think we've agreed that collective bargaining is a fair way to proceed, and I'm glad you're on top of it, and I hope that it becomes reality soon.
Thank you.
How will the new consolidation of assistance to... My time is up. Thank you. I didn't hear the tap, and I thought I'd get an additional...
I'll try to tap a little louder next time. Mr. Crenshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Madam Secretary. I want to ask you about this Arizona Border Technology Plan. That, as I understand it, you froze the activities under, I guess, SBI Net about a year and a half ago and put in a new plan, which, as I understand it, was to get the technology out quicker, more immediately, buy off-the-shelf type programs, and then help the Border Patrol meet their mission. But it's my understanding that all that technology hasn't kind of been put in place yet. There's $800 million, as I understand it, that you have available, and since this technology is not being utilized yet, I wonder if you could, is that, it must not be a budget issue, is that right?
It's a prudent procurement issue, and if I might explain, we froze SBI Net because, and we froze the fixed tower aspect of it that was border-wide because it was over cost and behind time-wise and not operational for a number of our agents. Different parts of the border require different things, and moved to a sector-specific planning for technology and put an emphasis on purchasing technologies that were already available. The integrated fixed towers across Arizona does have some use for the integrated fixed towers. Those are underway. The other sector plans, including Arizona's, have now been developed through CBP. They are in the final phases, and then we will go out and buy the technology. But we wanted to be careful here because we had been burned once by a rush to procurement here, and we want to make sure we get the right things that really fit the needs of a particular area. Those plans are now, like I said, they have been developed, and we will begin with Arizona first.
But I mean, $800 million is a lot of money, and if it's sitting there, it sounds like there's been a lot of delay. I can appreciate you want to do a good job of what you do. When you talk to the border agents, they're ready to have this technology. You've added some new agents, and they're doing a great job. But if there's a delay in all of this acquisition, these requests for proposals, whatever, is there any kind of bureaucratic problem? Is it simply you're just trying to do a really good job, and it takes a lot longer than we might think? Because it seems to me it's hard enough to appropriate money, and when the money's sitting there and it's not being utilized and we're not doing the job that we're supposed to do, then we need to understand why it's taking so long.
That's right, and I appreciate that problem. It's one of the reasons on the FEMA grant process where we're asking the states and putting some deadlines on when they get their money out the door. But the planning process is complete with the use of that technology. It has been careful. I really wanted to look at how the technology would interrelate with the operational needs of our agents, make sure we buy the things they can actually use and also maintain, repair, use over time. And those plans are now complete, and we're ready to go.
What is it like? I'm just looking. There's something called remote video surveillance system, and is it? I mean, I guess that's a kind of a understandable system that's available. Is there a reason why that hadn't been acquired yet?
Well, there are different needs at the board. There are places where the remote video surveillance just won't work, and we can buy it, but it really doesn't help us. There are places that are so rugged that we can't get to it regularly to...
Does that mean you're not going to, you don't need the radio surveillance, or are you just slow acquiring it?
No, it means that we're going to use different things in different areas because different areas have different requirements.
Well, are you going to use the radio surveillance?
In some areas, yes.
Then why haven't you gotten around to acquiring it?
Well, sir, we're not going to acquire it. The reason you do a plan, sector-specific plan, is to say, well, what is it that we need to acquire, and how much of it do we need to acquire? And what does it need to be able to do to be useful in that particular environment?
But don't you put that in the plan when you develop this Arizona technology plan?
That's what,
And then
that
we
is,
fund it?
that part of the planning, really looking at what was there, what we already have, what we need, what would work, what wouldn't work. That's what has been involved within the technology planning process that we started when I put the freeze on SBI Net.
I got you. Well, just turning to the I guess the personnel side, we've got a lot of new agents that have been Border Patrol, and things are going really well in Arizona. But as you know, it's kind of like that whack-a-mole or whatever. When you hit one, Arizona's doing good, and then it pops up down in the Texas border. So, I mean, how does all that fit in? When you do a good job in one area, do you anticipate that smuggling routes are going to change and people are going to go different places? Are you dealing with that now?
Yes, and we've seen it before on the border. This is a historical pattern. It's like a bedspread. You know, you move one corner, the other corner moves. I'm actually going to the South Texas border over the holiday weekend, or Monday, I think I'm going down there to see where we're at and look at the numbers and what our needs are there. The important thing we need to do, and this Congress has been very helpful in this regard, is sustain the record number of Border Patrol agents that we have. because that allows us to secure that border and gives us some flexibility to move people around without sacrificing yet another sector of the border. So we don't want to, just because we put a lot of resources in Arizona, move them all to Texas, and then Arizona becomes a problem. The way Congress has appropriated money to the Border Patrol, I think, has led to one of the success stories of the last 3 years, which is really making material progress on that southwest border.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here with us today, Madam Secretary. I'm trying to get a handle on the whole budget, which of course you've had a lot of time to get a handle of. One of the previous speakers had mentioned that there were 230,000. Is that the number of employees of the Homeland Security Department?
Roughly, yes.
Roughly, is it? Would you like to sharpen that closer?
No, I think 230,000 is a number we commonly use.
All right. I noticed that the budget in its totality is very similar to last year. In its totality, the $39.5 billion down just a little bit, but at only about 0.5%. Is there a job impact on that number 230,000 that comes with that 0.5% reduction?
There are no layoffs within that 0.5% reduction. We have been able to make some decisions with respect to limiting some recruitment or not replacing employees that retire. But
what would be the total impact of that? Or that's an attrition, that's a policy. What would that be in the course of the year? Within your budget?
The budget, and there's normal attrition, which is just happens, but then we replace those employees. But there are some targeted areas where we don't anticipate replacing employees. One of those would be the Coast Guard.
What then is the net impact of that, of the policy that you would follow in the total employment of the agency, of the Homeland Security Department?
It's minimal. I think for the Coast Guard, it's around 1,000 FTE, and there's a little haircutting in some other areas, but it is a minimal employment impact.
Okay. Can I get anything closer to what the total would be? You've given 1,000 for the Coast Guard. Is it likely to be 2,000, 3,000 total? Whatever your whatever your definition is for minimal.
Right. Well, I'm trying to distinguish between normal attrition, which I thought you were asking for, which varies across the department.
I want to know the net reduction in the department.
I would say no more than 2,000.
No more than 2,000. Okay, that's good. I noticed that half of the budget basically is in TSA and the Coast Guard and immigration and ICE, essentially, virtually half of the budget. And in those issues, in those areas, the budget is down by, in TSA, slightly over 6%, and Coast Guard right around 4%, and also for ICE right around 4%. What is the job impact of those reductions in those three major departments, that major sub areas that comprise virtually half the budget? How do you get those cuts without having a major job impact?
Well, there's no impact to frontline personnel. Part of the reason there are reductions is because investments in capital for those departments have now been made. And we don't need the same amount of money because we're not continuing to purchase at the same rate that we were purchasing before. So it would be what I would see as a normal decline in size of budgets where you have a lot of capital expenditures for explosive detection machinery or installing secure communities and the like. We're now pretty well, we're almost to the completion of some of those streams, and so therefore we don't need the same amount of money. But as I mentioned to you, the budget request of the President has a reduction of roughly 1,000 of the Coast Guard. It has, we anticipate, a couple of hundred in ICE. Those would be backroom and clerical administrative type personnel, and the same in TSA. But no reduction in the frontline operation of the departments.
Okay. I realize you had said that there was roughly a, pardon?
Time.
Time is up?
Your time has expired.
Oh, my goodness.
It goes by fast. Mr. Dent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being with us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the CFATS program. As you know, protecting our nation's chemical facilities is a daunting task, one that requires not just assessing the level of risk, but working with the private sector to coordinate and share information. I'm sure you've seen the internal memo concerning CFATS that was produced for Undersecretary Beers at the end of last year regarding the current challenges to the CFATS program. I don't think anyone can be pleased with the issues that are raised in that particular memo. Madam Secretary, from what I understand, this memo articulates that the mission, budget, staffing, and workplace culture within the Infrastructure Security Compliance Division as it relates to CFATS are not in any sort of working order. We've spoken on a number of occasions in the past and over the years regarding authorization of conflicts over inherently safer technologies. Accordingly, a review that shows this level of dysfunction of a program that is vital to our nation's security is disconcerting, to say the least. The American people are shouting at Congress and the administration to get our fiscal house in order, and yet we see where their finite dollars have been spent on things like unneeded equipment and in excess of contractors. Or even more concerning is that today, 5 years after the program was initiated, not one site security plan has been finalized, even though industry has submitted over 4,000 of them to DHS for approval. So I guess my main question, Madam Secretary, is what's your honest response to this internal assessment of the program, and what is the path forward?
Representative, I was not happy when I read that report, as you might imagine. We have done a number of things in the interim since that report was generated. We have developed an action plan for the CFATS program. It involves training of personnel. It involves changing some of the business system or the systems within the CFATS program to move the SSPs along. As you know, as you correctly noted, they seem to have been held up in the works for the Tier 1s, and we want to move those through. We've made some personnel changes and some administrative changes to have more oversight of the CFATS program. And I personally have the action plan and its dimensions or its segments of it on my desk right now. I share your concern.
So you're committed to making it work?
Absolutely. It's necessary. I mean, these chemical facilities can be a big security risk, so we need to make this work.
And one more issue. It's on the issue of personal surety. It's my understanding that a final rule is with OMB. The industry experts on the ground who have committed time and money toward meeting CFATS deadlines continue to express concern over the path that the department is pursuing with respect to personal surety. Some have suggested industry use the TWIC cards, but your administration is proposing to create an entire new credentialing system that's going to cost millions of dollars. And I'm just hoping, Madam Secretary, that why can't TWIC satisfy the CFATS personal surety requirements? And are you aware that this cost to industry if the current proposal is implemented? I'd like to see this done in a reasonable manner.
Representative, I will look into that. That's an interesting suggestion.
It's a very big concern, and TWIC is a good credential that I think we all have embraced.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'll yield back.
Thank you.
I'll yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Robo-Allard.
Welcome, Madam Secretary. First of all, let me begin by acknowledging that you have had success in improving aspects of our immigration detention system. However, I remain deeply concerned about the slow pace of detention reform because we continue to hear credible reports of sexual assaults, racism, random beatings, and management cover-ups in detention facilities. Also of concern is ICE's failure to make better use of alternatives to detention for immigrants who don't pose a threat to public safety, either in their communities or to our country. And so I'm pleased that your budget would dramatically increase funding for ATD and allow your department the flexibility to shift money from detention beds to these safe, effective programs. My question is that given the seriousness of the reported abuses at some of these detention facilities, will detention reform be a top priority for your department this year? And also, can you elaborate on the importance of increasing your budget to allow more flexibility in your reform efforts?
Well, I think operating a safe and secure detention environment is a responsibility that we have. We've done a lot in the detention area. As you noted, we've consolidated. We've added more oversight. We have issued proposed standards that exceed anything that would be, I think, issued under the Prison Rape Elimination Act. We're moving forward very, very carefully and aggressively there. And, it's part and parcel of running an effective immigration system. You've got to have good detention centers. We also are in the process of opening a detention center that will be used only for civil violators in the immigration context. So that is, if they haven't cut the ribbon, they will be shortly. With respect to ATD, you're correct. The budget does request additional funding for that. That will allow us to, I think, provide more oversight in the ATD population. It will also, I think, enable us to move some of those cases through more quickly so that individuals don't sit on the non-detained ATD docket for so long, and that would be an overall cost savings.
And Secretary, I think most of us could agree that we need comprehensive immigration reform. And I am pleased that your department has made some progress in instituting smarter and more effective enforcement policies. And one of those efforts is the ongoing review of the 300,000 deportation cases currently pending in our immigration system. Your department's effort will help to relieve our backlogged immigration courts and allow ICE to focus more of its scarce resources on violent criminals. It is my understanding that the pilot programs in Denver and Baltimore, which are part of that effort, resulted in the dismissal of more than 1,600 cases because those arrested had deep ties to the United States and posed no threat to our communities or to our country. What lessons did DHS learn from the pilots, and what is your department's timetable for undertaking its review of all the outstanding deportation cases?
First, just a technical correction, Representative. Any cases that we found that were of very low priority were not dismissed. They were administratively closed. And all that means is that if there is subsequent activity by the individual, they immediately can be reopened and restored to their place on the docket. So it's an important, I think, distinction to make.
Yes, thank you for that.
With lessons learned, we were really looking at how long the review took, what were some of the problems, what kind of guidance the lawyers in the department, the OPLA lawyers needed to fill out things. And we completed the pilot within about 6 weeks. Our intent is to have the whole backlog of the detained docket reviewed no later than the end of this year.
Okay, and under your leadership has been noted, DHS has made remarkable progress in securing our southwest border. And as the President stated in the State of the Union, lax border security is no longer a valid reason to oppose comprehensive immigration reform. In part, these gains have been achieved through the rapid expansion of the Border Patrol. However, I remain concerned about reports of Border Patrol corruption and of agents mistreating immigrants, including children, in their custody. In fact, in a recent NGO report, investigators documented more than 30,000 separate incidents at the Border Patrol. What steps is your department taking to improve the training and oversight of its personnel at the border in order to end this unacceptable pattern of abuse?
Well, I would dispute any NGO report that used those kind of numbers. From time to time, there are incidents, and we deal with them very firmly and swiftly. There's no reason for it within the Border Patrol system, but there's a lot of stuff said about what happens at the border that does not, in fact, pan out when you actually look at the facts. Beyond that, however, we have staffed up relatively quickly. We thank the Congress for the funds to do that. That's one of the ways we've been able to secure that southwest border. We want to sustain those agents down at the border. It's a record number of agents at the border. And the acting commissioner, David Aguilar, has now looked at and has said that making sure that training and supervision and anti-corruption measures are going to be some of his top priorities, particularly for those new agents and agents as they move through the system.
Okay, I've run out of time, but I would like to follow up with your department on the NGO report. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Judge Carter.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate you being here. DHS budget requests seek to fundamentally reform the FEMA grant programs. While strong, I support this. I think that your competition and procurement process is a good idea. But I have a couple of questions on this training partnership grants that concern me. They seem to negate significant investment Congress has made through the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium. It seems to me that this new direction is more concerned about starting up duplicative programs rather than bolstering existing programs. I've been told the current backlog of first responders seeking training of existing programs is over 20,000. In awarding funds to these new folks, they'll have to go through a curriculum approval and a lot of other startups, which will seem to create some kind of a lag in this. I guess first question is, has the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium failed to meet the training needs of first responders in this area? If not, then why do we need to divert funding to undertake significant costs of standing up new programs when grant funds are already scarce? And then secondly, how does the newly proposed structure of the training partnership grants and your request for $60 million address the backlog better than the existing training programs?
Well, with respect to all grants, we are seeking to consolidate and to streamline and to focus where the dollars will do the most good. I think we can all agree that that's an appropriate thing for us to do from a management perspective. With respect to eliminating redundancies, we will look at that. If you believe that to be a redundancy, we'll be happy to look at that. But our overall goal is to take what's before had been 16 different grant programs, all with different administrators and administrative guidelines and formulas and this and that, and say we are focused on the national preparedness goal.
And I understand that, but I really am curious about whether National Domestic Preparedness Consortium is failing to meet their mission.
I'll look, not that I know of, but I'll be happy to look into that for you.
Well, I mean, if we're going to start a duplicative program to do the same thing and they're doing their job, why not bolster those people that are doing the job?
I don't want to, Representative, I don't want to prejudge that, and we'll take a look at that.
And then finally, I just a minute ago heard you talking about this, one of the programs, the Denver, the Baltimore pilot program, where you were examining the caseload and seeing what's there. And this is, and this concerns all your non-detained cases. It's taken 6 weeks and endless hours of attorney time to look into this, resulting in administration closing only 14 of the cases. Those individuals may be grateful their cases were stopped, but the bulk of these people are still living and working illegally in the United States. Isn't that correct?
Well, they may no. I don't think you can say that they are working in the United States. That's a separate process.
They're living or existing or
they are in the United States. They are in the United States illegally. They are in the United States illegally.
Thank you. Now, what this has resulted in, I think, is a sort of an issue of prosecutorial discretion. The prosecutors under your authority are making selections, and quite honestly, I think this is resulting in, and we are not going forward on anything other than the criminal element, which everybody at this dais agrees should be kicked out of our country as quick as humanly possible. But we still have, as the chairman pointed out, somewhere between 12 and 14 million people that under our rules and our agreements are in our country illegally, and illegally by definition means they've broken a law. Okay? Now, this slowdown in dealing with these people, which is what this is, these two projects allowed for a slowdown or almost cessation of dealing with this element, this 14 million compared to the criminal element that we have deported, which is good. I mean, that seems to be making a choice of what laws you're going to enforce, what you're not. And I think it would be arguable you're not meeting the duty and responsibility of this office. Would you like to respond to that?
I obviously disagree with that characterization.
Well, but why?
I'll tell you why. Listen, and I haven't heard the 14 million number, but it's a number that's a big number. 10 million, 11 million are in the country illegally. Many have long-standing ties to their community. They are taxpayers. They are married to U.S. citizens. They have families here. I mean, there are a whole variety of individual circumstances that fall within that big umbrella. When the Congress, they give us resources that enable us to remove 350 to 400,000 people per year, and within that number, we have prioritized. And when you prioritize the mission. You end up really focused on the criminal aliens and the repeat violators and the ones you can get before they enter the interior of the country. And we want to focus on that part of the docket and the detained part of the docket and move those through more swiftly and more effectively than we have heretofore. And that's the reason why the administrator has allowed his agents and his lawyers to act like agents and lawyers in every other criminal justice agency in the federal government.
So you're just if I could ask one more question. So what you're saying is that you have evidence that shows that neglecting this other part of the docket has allowed you to speed up the other. Your success ratio is better than previous years because you're ignoring this. I don't care if it's 5 million, 10 million, 12 million, 14 million. They're getting ignored, and we're speeding up the process. Is that what you're stating?
What I'm saying, they are not ignored, as I explained earlier. We still will have 10% or so of removals last year were not within the criminal or other priorities of the department. They were still removed. But yes, we want to make sure that we increase the number and the percentage of criminal removals within the removal universe. And we've gone, Representative, I think when I started as the secretary, it was roughly 30% of the removed docket were criminal aliens. Now we're at 55 after 11. It will be higher in FY12.
Can you send that to me and maybe to the chairman? Let him take a look at it.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Latham.
I thank the chairman and welcome Madam Secretary. We have a lot of entrepreneurial individuals in this country have great ideas that want to make the country safer, and obviously they want to contract with DHS and with whether small companies, large companies. I can tell you that I'm hearing a lot from these businesses, these individuals, about frustration they have trying to break through with DHS. A couple examples: there's a small business that made a $100,000 investment and submitted its response to a very broad DHS multiple award contract solicitation notice. And the DHS has had the proposal since March of 2011. The award is delayed until December 2012, so the first task order will come at the earliest about 2 years after this business made the offer and invested in this. Another case, there's a mid-sized defense company thinks it has some great ideas for you and has submitted responses to 18 requests for information, but has never gotten a response back. Never heard a word back. Basically, this company is sending money into a black hole, and with just totally non-responsive, and it is very, very frustrating. I just wonder if you're aware of the various contracting and acquisition problems
at the department? And if so, do you know what efforts you're doing to work to correct the problems at the department?
Well, first, last year, almost 30% of our contracts were awarded to small business, well exceeding the federal
obviously
government.
Not these.
Obviously not those. But I wanted to give you the overall. Small business does contract with us. With respect to your first example, I suspect, without knowing for sure, but I suspect the reason there was the delay was we didn't get the FY12 budget, which allowed us to issue contracts until December of last year. And so a lot of contracting across the federal government had to wait for the actual budget and appropriation to be passed, and we didn't have it until December. With respect to the company that says they have submitted 18 requests for information, I'll ask my staff to follow up with your office, and we will make sure they get a response.
Well, I mean, the proposals you've had, they've never gotten a response from March of 2011.
Sir, we'll be happy to drill down on that for you.
And this is the first example I cited. It's just, I mean, it's not a matter of funding, I don't believe, because you've got an increase in funding for acquisition personnel.
It's not the funding, it's the appropriation, and we didn't have appropriations until December.
But you did have a continuing resolution. Yeah.
But if they were new contracts, the continuing resolution may not necessarily cover them. This is why we need to look at each instance individually.
It would not stop you in a continuing resolution.
No, issuing new contracts without a new appropriation, there are rules there that we have to abide by. I think the Department of Defense probably had some of the same issues.
It's an extension of the current authorization.
No. Sir, we'll be happy to look into that for you, but I'm pretty sure on that's what happened.
I would just ask you to go back and have somebody look at it and be able to report to the committee and to myself, if we could, on any actions that you're going to be taking. It's very frustrating, obviously, for a lot of folks. Did I hear you earlier with, I think, Mr. Judge Carter, talking about a lot of these people are working in the United States that are here undocumented, paying taxes, and the taxpayers?
They may be working, they may be paying taxes, they may not be working. There's a big difference there.
How do they get IRS, Social Security numbers, all of that, if they're here undocumented?
There's a variety of ways, Representative, that they pay taxes. They certainly pay sales taxes and other use taxes.
Well, I thought you said they were working here, so they would actually have to pay.
They get tax ID numbers, and they have taxes withheld, yes.
Obviously, it's a huge question, but you're obviously aware of the people using the same number, multiple people using the same numbers, and all of those issues.
We've been working with the Social Security Administration on that, and to develop, their computer systems are beyond belief at SSA, but to develop a flagging system, so if we see a duplicate number, that can immediately be flagged. E-Verify also, to the extent that employers use that, is an incredibly helpful tool to allow us to make sure that they are hiring only those legally present in the country.
Doesn't that, though, just say that there is a Social Security number there that doesn't necessarily match up with the individual who's sitting maybe across the desk? My time has expired.
If I might, Representative, there are other aspects of E-Verify that go into actual verification of identity.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Culberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for appearing today and for your testimony and your service to the country. I want to focus first on detention beds, and I'm sure you're aware that the Congress has, of course, appropriated every request that the agency's made for immigration enforcement. We've been very generous within, obviously, the money that we have available to us and being good stewards of the public's money, but we have fully funded every request that Homeland Security has made for immigration enforcement operations, and provided increases, of course, as well for detention beds. That's a key component, of course, in being able to actually hold people that the department picks up. And then 2012 Appropriations Bill, Congress required, I mean, it's not discretionary on your part, it is mandatory that ICE maintain 34,000 beds, detention beds, for incarcerating those who are here in the country illegally. Yet now, only 4 months into fiscal year 12, we see that ICE is only maintaining 33,200 beds. You've got the money to do it. You've got the obligation to do it. You're sworn to uphold the law. Why won't you use the beds? Why won't you comply with the law that Congress has passed and use at least the 34,000 beds that we've required you to do?
Representative, we do comply with the law. We enforce the law, and we have been enforcing it, much to the concern of others, with numbers that haven't ever been seen before. With respect to beds, it depends on whether you need the bed. We have the beds available so that if we need them, we can use them. The President's budget for FY13, as you note, does reduce somewhat the number of beds in favor of trying to put some more money in the alternative to detention area with the hope that we can make that more robust and save some money down the long road.
So you'd agree the subcommittee has made every request you submitted to the Congress for ICE custody operations and specifically to detention beds. We've funded those.
Yes, the Congress and the committee have been very helpful.
Super. And in fiscal year 12, we provided an increase to make sure you had the resources to fill 34,000 beds.
Well, in fiscal 12, you appropriated money for beds over and above the President's request. That's correct.
Right, and the law requires you to maintain no less than 34,000. Why aren't you fulfilling that obligation?
You know, Representative, I believe we have beds available. The question is, do we have the detained population at any given moment in time? It goes up and down. You know, you hold some people. Some are held 5 days. Some are held 3 weeks.
You're saying
it really varies.
You don't have enough customers, essentially. You don't have enough people to fill those beds.
It really depends on where you are. We need beds in some areas more than we need them in other areas of the country. It just depends. But right now, you are correct. We are not suffering from a bed shortage.
You don't need the capacity.
Right now, yes. Today, as I sit here before you, we have enough beds to handle the detained population.
You don't need that extra capacity.
I think that's another way to put it, yes.
Unbelievable. I mean, it really is unbelievable for you to testify that you don't need those extra beds when the violence in Mexico is out of control. It really is so inconsistent with reality. It reminds me of your statement that the border's under operational control. For you to say you don't need the detention beds, that the border's under operational control, that that's from a statement you made last year in El Paso, Texas, which caused all of us in Texas a lot of concern because of the violence.
Neil, I think she said she had the 800 beds. They just don't, and she would use them if they were needed. So I don't see what
sure,
the purpose
the concern
of this
is that there's so many
harangue is.
Well, the concern is that my good friend from Washington is that there are so many illegal aliens in the country. You said yourself it's 11 to 12 million. And among that population, you've got a tremendous number that have committed crimes against Americans, violent crimes, and all sorts of other crimes. The capacities, I'm sure the demand is there. I know the demand is there. There's no shortage. But you've directed the agency to look elsewhere. That was my concern, Mr. Dix, is that as the Secretary just testified, they are prioritizing. You've asked ICE agents to prioritize the cases that they pursue.
That's correct.
And you're dropping off low priority cases. That's where I was going with it, Mr. Dix, is the concern is there. I suspect they've got plenty of people that they could put in those beds, and actually there's even additional bed space available above and beyond the 34,000.
I would suggest, Representative, that the things we have defined as low priorities are cases that wouldn't go onto the detained docket, so they would not be in detention. You have fully funded our bed requests in the past, and we appreciate that. The President has requested an amount we think we will need in FY12, and has also requested an amount to increase our alternative to detention system.
Thank you, Ms. Culverson. Madam Secretary, as I mentioned to you earlier this week, I want to commend the men and women of FEMA who have been on the ground in my home state of Alabama over the past year in their efforts to help the recovery from the devastation of the tornadoes that occurred on April 27th in 2011. Also commend you, and I thank you for making at least, I know, a couple trips to Alabama during that time to look at the disaster firsthand. Much progress has been made. Much work remains to be accomplished. And I look forward to working with you over the next year to try to accomplish as much as possible. I do have one question that is included in the request, about what is included in the request. Your budget includes a request of $6.1 billion for the DRF, but we're having difficulty figuring out what this request contains, since the required documentation justifying the request, as required in law to be submitted with the budget, was submitted at 9:30 last night, so not in time for a thorough review. One thing did come up this morning. Based on the report that was received last night, the Department of Homeland Security estimates that no funds will be needed for recovery efforts after FY13 for the spring tornadoes or the flooding in the Midwest or from Hurricane Irene in the Northeast. Typically, we have seen FEMA continue recovery efforts for years after a disaster occurs, but it appears that this is not the case for the disasters that occurred last year. Is this an accurate statement?
Yeah, I think what that reflects, Mr. Chairman, is that we have really focused within FEMA at streamlining getting the money out to the communities that need it. And so as we are able to speed that up, we're able to reduce the number of years for which we need to ask for additional appropriations. The way the DRF request is structured this year for FY13 is we have asked for 600 some odd million in FEMA's base budget for disaster management. We have asked then that 5.1 billion be so-called above the line to handle disaster payments for non-catastrophic disasters and also catastrophic disasters that for which we already know we have payments due in FY13. If we were to have a catastrophic disaster above and beyond that in FY13, we would seek an emergency supplemental.
Do we have your assurance that this request is sufficient to cover all known costs for FY13?
As far as I know, but we will make double sure. We had so many states, yours included, some of the other states on the panel included, that suffered grievous damage in the spring and summer. Our folks are working very hard with those communities to get that money out.
But we do have your assurance that
we're not going to shortchange Alabama.
Thank you for your commitment for your commitment on that, and I look forward to discussions with you over the next year as we continue down the road to recovery. Let me switch gears, go to another issue. The FY13 budget supports significant reform to the grant programs, as you mentioned in your opening statement, that is administered by FEMA. Just 2 days ago, you issued a new guidance to expedite the expenditure of previously awarded grant funds. First, I'd like to commend you for tackling the more than the $10 billion in unobligated funds and unexpended balances that sit unused in these programs. It is extremely hard for Congress to continue to justify allocating billions of dollars of taxpayers' funds when so much remains unspent. The memo you signed out this week provides multiple ways to address the backlogs of funds in the FEMA grant program. For those who are unfamiliar, first of all, you will permit grant funds to be used for additional expenses such as general purpose equipment and non-construction related operational costs. Also, you allow certain restrictions to be waived, such as the 50% cost cap on personal and various match requirements. In addition, you allow for grant funds to be used for the maintenance and the sustainment of equipment that was not acquired with grant funds. And also, you've shortened the period of performance. Madam Secretary, some of these new allowances raise concerns that the grant funds will become operating subsidies and might be expended in a manner that could be wasteful. So I'm wondering, did you consider pulling back or de-obligating funds, such as the $2 billion that remains on the books from FY07 and FY08?
What we did, Mr. Chairman, was we listened. We explored the reasons why money was being allocated, but was not yet out the door. What were the holdups, and what were things that we were routinely approving anyway? That if we just said at the outset we're going to waive the match on port security grants, for example, almost every community in the country that has a port has asked for a waiver of that match, and given the security needs of the ports, we have been routinely granting those waivers on a case-by-case basis. And so what we have tried to do is take into account what our grantees have said, to put that into just for these years back to 07, where we have money still in the pipeline, to help get that money out of the grantees' doors. This is not money that's held in the federal government now. This has already been allocated to the grantees.
My time is up, but I would like to ask one last question. Tell us about how you're working with the appropriate authorizing committees to address the reform efforts.
Well, we'll be working with, there'll be the Homeland Security Authorizing Committee. I think I have my budget hearing with them this afternoon in the House, and we'll be working with them on the Senate side. And we have put legislative language in the budget request for how we would go about this, but we will work with and be happy to work with the Congress on how we do this reform as we prepare the FY13 actual appropriation.
Okay. All right, my time has expired. Mr. Price?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, let me return to this question of immigration enforcement. You rightly stated a few moments ago that when your feasible deportation level is 300 to 400,000 people a year, you've got to set priorities. This subcommittee, beginning in 2007, and your administration have attempted to impose some priorities on a scattershot process of deportation. That's what's has gone on here, and it's what's at stake, I think, in the discussion we're having this morning. Anybody who wants to object to your priorities, I think, has a certain burden of proof to name their priorities, as opposed to implying you can deport 11 million people indiscriminately. So I commend you for this, and I know that this Secure Communities program is the main instrument for achieving some kind of prioritization in immigration enforcement. You've now had a task force to evaluate the program, and the charge was, quote, to see how ICE can adjust secure communities to mitigate potential impacts on community policing practices, including whether and how to implement policy regarding the removals of individuals charged with but not convicted of minor traffic offenses who have no other criminal history. That's part of the charge. Now, not all members were in agreement on the findings and recommendations, but the task force provided a report to DHS Homeland Security Advisory Council and to you on September of last year. It's my understanding that the Secretary and ICE and the Advisory Council are now considering still these recommendations. Now, during this time frame, the administration's taken various actions to clarify its enforcement policies, and I'll be brief here, but I do want you to respond as to the current state of these efforts. One, making clear that states and cities can't opt out of secure communities. Two, undertaking a large-scale review of all existing deportation cases to focus more effectively on removing high-priority offenders. Three, issuing guidance on prosecutorial direction for attorneys and immigration judges. Four, improving training and best practices dissemination for local jurisdictions. And five, revoking some 287G authorities, Maricopa County, Arizona, for example. Now, Secure Communities is going to be activated nationwide by 2013, so we clearly need to stay abreast of these ongoing efforts, and hence my questions. First, what further actions have you taken over the past year to ensure that Secure Communities adheres to its stated enforcement objectives of prioritizing those who pose a risk to public safety or national security, and that those charged with minor offenses such as traffic violations are not top enforcement priorities unless there are other indicators of risk? And then secondly, what actions has your department taken in response to the recommendations of this task force convened last year?
Well, the two things blend together, Representative, and The 5 things you have noted all are underway or have already been completed. So there's been a lot of work done in ICE to really make sure that we weren't doing scattershot enforcement, but that we were doing focused, smart, effective enforcement on within the universe of those in the country illegally. The work continues. Other things we have done as secure communities has gotten turned on in various jurisdictions. We just turned on Minnesota, Maryland, Connecticut, and New Jersey in the last 10 days or so, statewide in those instances. As it has gotten turned on, we can now begin to see the data is coming in as to who is picked up and what does that mean. And we are going to evaluate seriously whether all of those will actually have a detainer put on them by ICE. And that would be the recommendation of the evaluation committee, that we not put a detainer on those who are only in jail because of a minor offense.
You may want to add here, or you can add for the record. Are there other aspects of these recommendations that you have under consideration at this moment? Are there more aspects of this beyond the question of the minor offenders?
Well, we have, as noted, undertaken, we call it the case-by-case review, but it's the review of all the cases on the non-detained docket. We anticipate having that done by the end of the year. We have made changes in the detainer form that individuals get so that they know better what their rights are, and also where they can call if, for example, they believe they are actually a U.S. person and they should not be put into the ICE detention or have an ICE detainer placed on them. We have instituted a kind of cross-department, very significant statistical review within secure communities to identify jurisdictions that may not be deploying it properly, or also jurisdictions where we need to put more of our own resources. So that's all a set of activities underway under ICE's jurisdiction.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Rogers.
Madam Secretary, on TSA, last year, fiscal 12, current year, we reestablished the cap on the number of screeners at 46,000 full-time screeners. I'm told as of November, TSA has some 51,000 screeners, full and part-time, which certainly would exceed the cap. Can you help us on understanding those numbers?
I'll have to provide you some supplemental information, Representative Rogers, but as you know, we have screeners where we have lanes, and that's really where the numbers are generated from.
Well, that cap has been at the outset of the department in place for several years, and then it was lifted, but it's been reinstated now, and we are insisting that that cap be enforced.
Thank you.
The budget request again reduced frontline personnel, air and marine acquisitions, and Coast Guard drug interdiction capacity. The budget proposal cuts critical Coast Guard frontline personnel by over 500 military billets, even while we were increasing headquarters funding and FEMA grants by 22%. In addition, the budget proposes to slash current and future capabilities for drug interdiction for Coast Guard and CPB. CPB air and marine procurement is reduced by 52%. Coast Guard's patrol boat hours slashed by as much as 40% in the Caribbean. We've rejected that kind of budget slashing in the past, and while the Mexican drug wars rage out of control, and the Calderon administration is coming to an end, how can we justify those kinds of cuts on the drug interdiction capacity?
Well, if I might, Representative, we start with fitting the President's budget request into the Budget Control Act, which, as you know, has significant cuts in all kinds of areas of government. What we've done with the Coast Guard is to prioritize the acquisition of the NSC 6, National Security Cutter 6. We also have for the fast response cutters, we are only acquiring 2 this year. Why? Because FY12 provided for 6, and the production line is basically 4 a year. So 11, we had 4, got 6 in the 12 budget. We asked for 2 in the 13 budget. The average is 4, and that is what the Coast Guard says that it needs. With respect to the 500 billets, one of the things that's happening is we are decommissioning some of the really, really old vessels and substituting for them newer acquisitions, which generally require fewer crew in order to operate.
Well, the budget includes funding, as you've suggested, for the 6th National Security Cutter. But the snapshot that you gave to us shows that the program is essentially terminated after fiscal 13, even though the mission needs statement for the Coast Guard and the program of record supports the need for 8 cutters. So where are we on the 8 cutters?
7 and 8.
Yeah.
What we are going to do, and this is all guided by really looking at the nation's resources and the Budget Control Act and how it works, but and there's language in the budget request to this effect. We will look at 7 and 8 in light of what the Navy is doing. So we need to look at what the Department of Defense is doing with respect to their own force laydown to see what we need to be putting in the acquisition pipeline. And obviously areas like the Caribbean, South America, areas where we must be constantly vigilant will be in that mix. But rather than just look at the NSCs in isolation from everything, and I think this is actually a better way to go about it, we're really going to be working with the Department of Defense, so when they have their revised laydown, we'll put ours next to it and see where we are.
Well, the mission needs statement is very plain about the need for 8 cutters, as well as the program of record.
The program of record was drafted in 2004 and hasn't been updated, and I think in light of the Budget Control Act and other changed circumstances, we need to be able to look at 7 and 8. I have fought very hard for those cutters in the last 3 years. We had a fight about getting 4 and 5 and 6, and the President has fully funded 6. But we need to make sure that our resources are correlated with what particularly the Navy is going to do moving forward after that.
Well, the Coast Guard's taken a pretty good hit. One quick question, Mr. Chairman, or comment. We can't talk about this in the open, but I want to get an update from you on the Federal Air Marshal Service, FAMS. We'll have to do that quietly because it is classified. However, I am concerned about the efficiency and efficacy even of that program and the cost. And I'd like to have a report, a confidential report, of course, classified report on all aspects of FAMS.
All right, no problem.
Thank you.
Mr. Dix?
Last year in my state we had a group of citizens come in from eastern Washington. I'm over on the west side. This is our agricultural area. And they couldn't get workers to pick the apples, the pears, and a lot of these crops just were left in the field. So what do we do about the guest worker program? How is that functioning from your perspective? You're former governor, attorney general.
U.S. Attorney.
U.S. Attorney.
Yeah,
How's the guest worker program operating.
Well,
What can we do to try to bring people in legally to help in this agricultural issue?
Representative, I think it's another illustration of why immigration reform is needed. I hear from growers all the time they can't get workers. We have acres lying fallow. We have agriculture jobs moving to Mexico where they can get workers. We have other businesses that can't get workers of the type that they need. But I think we have done as much as we can at the administrative level. Legislative action is going to be required.
Is there a limit on the guest worker program?
Well, there's a limit on visas for people coming in to work, and that limit is very, very low. This is something that has been troublesome in the ag industry for a long time among the growers, but we're really reaching almost crisis proportions with it.
Yeah, I would hope that, as much as seems to be a temptation to treat this thing politically, that we have a serious economic problem here that has to be addressed. And I just hope that we can, on a bipartisan basis, finally come to grips with this issue, because the problems are getting worse and worse.
I think we're seeing now erupting around the country all sorts of individuals from different aspects of the economy coming forward and saying, and they come to me, they say, can't you do this and can't you do that? And the answer is that most times I have to say no.
And these are business people, that small business people, farmers, people who've got a big stake in their orchards and that. It's a real tragedy. We can't get people in our own country to do the work.
Sadly, that is so, and also a lot of these businesses create other jobs that are filled by American citizens. So there is a big economic aspect to this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Price talked about other priorities. Let me ask you a couple of questions. I know you're a lawyer.
Yes.
You don't practice law right now?
Thankfully.
I don't practice law right now, but you got some lawyers with us.
I do indeed.
Well, a couple of things. I think it's the federal law has to obtain a Social Security number of false pretenses. I think it's a crime. Have your staff check that out. I think it's a crime to obtain a Social Security card under false pretenses. I think it's a crime to utilize somebody else's Social Security card. Mm-hmm. I don't know at what level. May only be in this misdemeanor. I doubt. I would imagine it would be more than a traffic citation, but maybe not. So check that out for me. In Texas, I do know we have a law called theft of services. It is a felony offense in Texas, depending on the amount of services you steal. And I think felonies should be on your list of people you ought to be looking at, but maybe you disagree. I think it's against the law to make false statements and swear to false statements on certain documents in the United States, both at the federal level and the state level. And I know it's a violation of the law to obtain food stamps when you're not entitled to them, because I've actually tried those cases, so I happen to know that's against the law. And I was a felony judge. So I don't think we are addressing any of those issues, which might reach possibly as many as half of these people in our category of somewhere between 8 and 14 million people that are in this country illegally. But so I would at least make an argument that you are making a prosecutorial determination as to what is an important crime and isn't an important crime, both at the investigative side as well as at the prosecutorial side.
Well, we generally...
So in answer to Mr. Price's, being a law and order type of guy, I believe if you violate a felony law, whatever that felony law is, whether it's possession of marijuana, which everybody thinks ought to be legal these days, or whether it's something like, armed robberies, big felony, just theft in general. Both those ought to be prosecuted. That's my opinion. I have a question that I want to ask you. That's just really to answer what I was said I didn't give my priority. That's my priority, Mr. Price. I didn't want to interrupt you when you were talking. You've mentioned a couple of things that I'd like you to define. In your opening statement, you talked about immigration integration efforts. I'd like to know what that is. You've also mentioned alternative to detention. I know what alternative to detention was in my court. Could you tell me what alternative to detention is in your agency?
Immigration integration is the phrase used for how we integrate legal immigrants into the country. And so that's what that refers to. ATD actually covers a broad range. It can be anything from simple requirements that people report on a regular basis to a designated place, all the way to full-time ankle bracelets with, call-in requirements and the like. So there's a whole continuum of activity that falls under the rubric ATD. One of the things we want to do is really look at what forms of ATD make sense for the non-detained illegal immigrant population. Because that may and be very different for the immigrant population versus the criminal population as a whole. One of the things President's budget request allows us to do is to make that evaluation on an ongoing basis.
And many years ago, when I first got this job, not that many years ago, I had a little meeting with some folks down in Houston, and they were talking about the no-shows coming back to the immigration courts. They were released, told to report back. They didn't report back, and they never saw them again. And just in Houston, it was like 14,000. Okay?
That's why we have to carefully evaluate ATD, because we want to make sure that we are not increasing that population. It's also a reason, by the way, why we are proceeding on formal removal of recent border crossers, because we don't, and repeat offenders, because individuals who are using that border as a revolving door, we're shutting that down.
That's good. That's good, because, I looked it up one time, and maybe I was looking in an old code or something. I think the third crossing with proof of the first two crossing accelerates the level of crime that is as far from a
1325 to a 1326.
Yeah,
yes.
1325 to 1326.
That's correct.
And so that's information you ought to have. But on this no-shows in court, whatever level court it is, there should be a certain amount of respect for an order of the judge of that court. And you've been ordered to come back, and you don't come back, and there's no consequences for not coming back. There's no reason for anybody to ever obey the order of that court.
Representative, I'll just answer this question. If there is a no-show and a warrant, that person under our rubric becomes a fugitive, and a fugitive is within the priority definition of the ICE.
So he would be a deportable person?
He would be a deportable person.
Thank you.
Ms. Roby-Allard.
Well, first of all, I'd like to see the credible evidence that would show that at least half of those who are here illegally that don't pose a threat to their community are in fact on food stamps or whatever other assistance that was referred to. Also, as part of the discussion that you had with members of the other side of the aisle, I would like to add to the record that estimates from Princeton's Mexican Migration Project indicate that undocumented immigration to the United States from Mexico has declined to net zero or possibly negative levels, and that means that in basic terms that last year more undocumented Mexicans left the U.S. to return home than entered the country illegally, and I believe that is partly due to your successful efforts at the border. I'd like to shift to what's happening in Puerto Rico. The reports I've gotten that in response to the success that you've had at the southwest border, that it appears that drug traffickers have increasingly shifted their operations to the Caribbean, and that since 2009, cocaine seizures in Puerto Rico are up by 30%. At the same time, drug-related violence on the island has continued to climb, and the murder rate in Puerto Rico now stands at six times the national average. Because Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, I am concerned that the federal government has focused more on preventing illegal drugs from entering the U.S. mainland from Puerto Rico than preventing these drugs from reaching the island in the first place. So on behalf of my friend and colleague, Congressman Pierluisi, and the 3.7 million Americans living in Puerto Rico, I'd like to ask whether your department intends to devote greater resources to the region to address these troubling trends which have been reported.
The answer is yes. As it's actually a sign of the progress, substantial progress made on the southwest border, that we are seeing some increase in both the Atlantic and the Pacific sides of the country in trying to bring drugs in. And so we're altering, and moving resources appropriately to deal with that ongoing threat. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And let me just say, Ms. Royal, that Madam Secretary, that has Puerto Rico has been a big priority for this subcommittee. So thank you for mentioning that. Mr. Culberson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I wonder if I could to try to get a handle on how you classify and how you're prioritizing the individuals that are picked up in the country either by local law enforcement or by the or by Border Patrol or ICE. You said a moment ago that you don't issue detainers on individuals arrested for minor offenses.
No, I said that was the recommendation of the advisory committee. The recommendation is still being evaluated.
Still being evaluated. What's your when you say you're prioritizing individuals that are picked up? Could you help us understand how you're prioritizing them? For example, I understand from a New York Times report from January 7th that the union representing immigrations and customs enforcement officers have refused so far to participate in this training that you've set up to guide ICE officers in prioritizing who is prosecuted, who is removed, deported, etc. The ICE agents the unions, I gather, still refusing so far to participate in the training?
Well, I think there was a statement by the union president, and you're right, he has been recalcitrant. But the agents, and I've been working with immigration agents 20 years now. I supervised 6,000 immigration prosecutions at one point, so I know this community fairly well. Mm-hmm. They want to work on the more serious cases. They want to know they took a murderer off the street or an armed robber or somebody that was committing repeated drug crimes. So they're there, and the training is ongoing, and we are seeing in the numbers, if you just look statistically at what's happening, we are seeing a change in the numbers of the composition of those we are returning.
And we all want you to focus on the most serious offenders, but I'm trying to get a handle on who the administration has decided to basically turn a blind eye to. I see from this article the training asks ICE agents what they should do, for example, with a young illegal immigrant who was arrested for driving without a license, who's been living, the example is, in this country since 1993 illegally and has an infant son, an American citizen because he was born here, but she lied to ICE officers, failing to tell them that she had a conviction for shoplifting in 1995. And the training states, she answers, she's not a threatening criminal who may still be nursing her American baby, and officers should close the case. Do you agree with that?
Well, I do, and I'll tell you why. Because if you don't, first of all, you have to make the assessment the person doesn't pose a physical safety risk. Secondly, the conviction was very old. Third, if she's deported, what happens to her small child? Does the small child, if she's a single parent, now do we have to assume the cost of taking care of the child and they go into the child welfare system, or do we have to split up the family?
Right.
So those are the kinds of considerations at that lower end of the docket that need to be taken into account.
What I'm trying to get a handle on, and all of us agree, A, we want you to focus on the most serious cases, and B, nobody is suggesting that you should deport all the folks that are here illegally. We want you to enforce the laws as they're written, and the law states very clearly that if a person is for example, enter the country illegally under 1325, it's 6 months in jail, first offense. Second offense is 2 years in jail under Title 8 U.S. Code Section 1325. And we're trying to understand who's at the lower end of the scale.
Well,
what type of cases would you recommend that to your officers that they be administratively closed?
Well,
what type of cases?
One would be a young person who was brought here by their parents or an adult as a small child, raised here, went to school here, has gotten good grades, done everything they're supposed to do, may actually have served in the military.
Okay.
But because they were not actually born here, they are not construed as legally present.
Sure. Essentially, those people defined by the DREAM Act, which did not pass Congress.
It did not pass a cloture vote in the Senate. That is correct.
It's not the law, but you're making it the law through your. Well, you just said you're making it. This essentially.
I said they were low priority. We still get DREAM.
Close them administratively.
Some of them were closing administratively, which means if that person commits another crime or in other ways comes into the system, that file probably would be reopened.
If it's a misdemeanor.
It depends on the misdemeanor. Misdemeanors, that can be a traffic ticket.
So your policy then is fair to say if they fall under the classification of the DREAM Act, your agency's position is that case should be closed administratively.
Our administration's position is we're going to focus on those who have committed serious crimes.
And not on those people who are found, for example, a low priority or a...
No, but that doesn't mean they won't still get into the system. I mean, it really is how you direct your agents, the operations you put together. We put together, for example, something we call Operation Crosscheck, and it's designed to go out in many states and find fugitives from warrants, as was being mentioned earlier today. So, it's how you use the resources we have to have the best impact on public safety.
I thank the chairman for the extra time, but it does sound like the administration has implemented de facto amnesty for a large segment of those who are here illegally.
Thank you, Mr. Culberson. Let me, I know you've got a hearing just in another few minutes. You're back on in just a few minutes. Let me just, in closing, just let me just touch on one issue. The National Academy of Sciences, in the analysis of NBAF, estimates there is a need for a facility like NBAF to be constructed in the United States. However, what is confusing is that there's no construction funding, and your statement in which you say you plan to reassess whether or why a BSL-4 facility should be stood up. Let me just ask, is there any doubt that the Department of Homeland Security still plans to establish a modern BSL-4 facility in the U.S. mainland?
That is our intent, Mr. Chairman, and this is one of those issues that I think requires serious conversation with the Congress because, for example, last year the President asked for $150 million for the so-called NBAF. This House recommended $75 million. The Senate zeroed it out. We ultimately ended up with $50. And we've had trouble with getting the money for the NBAF for the last 3 years. This nation needs a BSL Level 4 facility. It has been peer-reviewed and put in Kansas. It's near a lot of other resources that makes sense to put it there. What we have asked for is $8 million to do research in Kansas that is consistent with work in this area, but also to assess scope and cost of the NBAF in light of the Budget Control Act and other constraints that are being placed on us.
But it's your contention that it is absolutely needed and plans are to move forward with that.
That is our position.
We just need to make sure that we square the budget with that. Make sure that
that is my hope.
Yes. Well, appreciate you testifying before us today. And in closing, let me say we certainly have a lot of work cut out for us this year. We do have before us a budget that once again relies upon fictitious offsets by way of unauthorized increase. It immediately cuts Coast Guard frontline operations by 500 military billets, Coast Guard acquisitions by 20%, CBP air and marine procurement is cut by 52%. Detention bed space by 1,200 beds. As I just mentioned, zeroes out the MBAF facility. And while at the same time increases headquarters function as well as proposes a $525 million increase in grants that will take years to spend out. This type of budget proposal, raises a lot of questions and a lot of significant concerns. Also, I must return to an issue that I addressed in my opening remarks in regard to compliance with our statutory reporting requirements. Would you tell us for the record when we will receive the FY11 report, the 11 reports and the plans that were required by statute to be submitted with the FY13 budget?
We will submit them as soon as we can. I think there are some that are on their way right now, and we'll be happy to give your staff the status report on those reports. But we know the committee wants them and would like them to help inform the decisions for FY13.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned, these reports are required by law, and they're largely made up of material the department ought to have in order for these vital programs. So I would submit to you that we need an answer today on that.
We'll try to get you a schedule, yes, sir.
So we'll expect your staff to get back with us today regarding that. Again, thank you for a hearing. And yes.
Just, I've got some information on bed space capacity that I think would be useful just to have for the record. We're going to get the director of ICE on Friday.
It'll be included in the record, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Culberson. Thank you again, Madam Secretary, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.